This is a live look at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Party members and officials are getting a different convention with a different candidate from what they expected at the start of the summer. Outgoing U.S. President Joe Biden makes a speech tonight after ending his campaign some 4 weeks ago. He will symbolically pass the torch to party nominee for president Kamala Harris. This is not the first time the DNC has held its convention in Chicago. It was held there back in 1968, and like today, there were protests and some political turmoil. So what's the same this time and what's different? For that, I want to speak with Frank Kusch. He's a historian and the author of Battleground Chicago, The Police and the 1968 Democratic National Convention. Frank is joining us now from Saskatoon. Frank, thank you for taking the time to speak to CBC News Network. As you know, the DNC kicking off tonight in Chicago. It's very difficult for a lot of us to not try and draw some parallels with the one that was held in the Windy City in 1968, but I understand that you're seeing more differences and more divergences as opposed to similarities.
Well, first off, thanks for having me, Abby. I really appreciate being here. As human beings, we're pattern seekers largely. We like to sort of uncover and break apart and explain why complicated situations that we have. And we have something like what happened in 1968 in Chicago. It sets up sort of a way of looking at, a way of explaining what's happening today. But I really think there's very few similarities. We have a Democratic Party that happens to be going to the city of Chicago. And for a while, it looks like they were going to go in as a divided party, but that's now evaporated. So other than Joe Biden, somebody like Lyndon Johnson, who decided not to seek re-election for his party, there isn't a lot that compares then and now. But I think what's happened is because the American political scene in the last, at least since 2016, has been so magnified that it appears like we're living in a constant state of chaos. So when you're looking at the 1960s, when you think about Chicago and the DNC, images of violence, police violence, chaos, really run the narrative. They really make it vivid. And I think that because of our current political climate, we want to see that there are some similarities. At least it's a comforting thing that we know we've been there before, and therefore we might have some mechanisms, some solutions to avoid it again. But I don't think it's quite that simple.
Given the uncertainty and the upheaval that we saw before the 1968 convention, it was happening under the shadow of the Vietnam War. There were great mass protests against America's participation there. There was also the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. as well. So there was a lot of other social upheavals happening at that time. So again, when you talk about these parallels, why did the Democratic Party decide on Chicago? I mean, Illinois is not a swing state. They could have held it somewhere else.
They wanted to avoid the image of chaos or the memories of 68, then perhaps another city or a swing state would have been a little bit more apt. But I don't think it's necessarily something the Democratic Party wants to do. I don't think they're trapped by the past. I think this is an opportunity to reclaim Chicago and reclaim its base. If this party wants to win in November of this year, they need the base. Yes, they need the swing states, obviously. But this is an opportunity, I think, to recast Chicago, not as a place of chaos and division, but one where that they can bring the elements of the party, perhaps elements of the old New Deal coalition, something that Lyndon Johnson was able to bring together for a short time in 1964 in the landslide election. The Democratic Party has had some challenges doing that since. So I would think that they want to put on a good show in a city that's seen so much trouble in the past and reclaim it, especially with I think, a really untapped voter group, which is voters between 18 and 24, who historically make a lot of noise and then ghost at the polls. I think this is an opportunity for Harris and Walz to a certain extent to really grab that attention in a good way and have an opportunity to talk about things that matter, not just healthcare and jobs, but the cost of living, the cost of renting an apartment, and the things that she's already talking about in her economic plan. So instead of harking back to dark times and reflecting that, I think they have a chance to reflect optimism and joy. And while that might sound a little silly, I think since Biden dropped out and Harris dramatically has come on the scene, it's been it's like a major chord, a very positive view that I think a lot of voters that are tired, that are exhausted with chaos all the time, with the nature and the style of Donald Trump, that they can reshape and recast how they think this election can be won and how the country can be governed.
Thank you so much for this. Historian, author Frank Kusch, we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, Abby.